What's poppin', my Defiance dudes and dudettes? It's me, MT, and welcome back to the Heavy Spoiler Show, y'all. This is going to be a breakdown of episode 2 of Rick and Morty season 8, titled Valkyrick. So, let's not waste any more time and let's just jump into this thing, my nerd babies. The episode begins at the underwater headquarters of the Galactic Defiance, an obvious parody of the Rebels and Resistance factions from the original and sequel Star Wars trilogies. The Galactic Defiance made their first appearance in Season 4, Episode 10's Starmort, Return of the Jerry, along with the character of Space Beth. The circular meeting room that all of these aliens assemble in resembles the strategy center that the Rebel Alliance had on Yavin 4 in A New Hope. This is, of course, part of an ongoing Star Wars parody of a galactic war between these rebellious Galactic Defiance members and the new Galactic Federation, who are essentially the First Order in this Rick and Morty universe, as this new Galactic Federation was built from the brutally shattered remains of the original Galactic Federation that Rick and his best friends Bird Person and Squanchy spent years fighting against, with that original Galactic Federation being destroyed by Rick in a previous season. This episode primarily being centered around Rick and Bird Person mentoring their children in how to fight a fascist war faction is very much like how the original trio from the Star Wars trilogy helped the sequel protagonists with their war with the First Order. It's kind of like passing the torch. And hey, speaking of Squanchy, a female member of Squanchy's race of sentient cat-like alien creatures can be seen amongst the crowd of freedom fighters, with her hair having been dyed pink and blue, much like the recent depictions of Harley Quinn in the DCEU. Corsica, the robotic life form that addresses the Defiance, seems to be modeled after the Star Wars droid L337, Donald Glover's robot girlfriend from Solo: A Star Wars Story. You know, that one Star Wars movie that lives rent-free in everyone's mind. I can't stop thinking about Solo: A Star Wars Story. Sometimes when I'm making love, all I can think about is that Solo: A Star Wars Story. Just kidding, I don't make love. You have to have girls to make love. I'm so alone. Anyway, Corsica is also the name of a mountainous French island in the Mediterranean. But yeah, during this meeting, the Alliance are planning on assassinating the Queen of the Gromflomites, with this queen purposely having been designed like the late Queen Elizabeth. But the problem is the Defiant is stuck arguing with one another as to exactly how to go about this assassination, being far too concerned with forming committees, squabbling, and voting rather than actually addressing the problem. A parody on how both the Galactic Senate from the Star Wars prequels and the New Republic Senate from the Star Wars sequels were both also immobilized by such procedural bickering. And much like Carrie Fisher's Senator Leia Organa was at the start of the sequel trilogy, Space Beth, the assassin, is fed up with being strung up by committees and decides to take action herself. And using a pair of high-tech web wings like Spider-Man, Beth glides through space and successfully lands inside of this Gromflomite space cruiser. Like, that space flight and landing kind of reminded me of that space jump from Star Trek Into Darkness. You know, when Chris Pine and Benedict Cumberbatch would just like launch themselves through space and landed on the enemy ship. And as Beth begins her assault on the ship, she shoots out one of her hands to long distance punch one of her enemies, reminding us that she is indeed as much of a cyborg Inspector Gadget type figure as her father is. There's actually a lot of similarities between both Space Beth and Rick in this episode. The 3 sentries guarding the Queen's bedroom wear outfits modeled off of the King's Guard outside of Buckingham Palace in England, even resting their firearms on their shoulders in similar fashion. However, when Beth arrives in the Queen's bedroom to do the big deed, she realizes that another Gromflomite assassin seems to have beat her to it. Beth is then immediately confronted by a Gromflomite scientist and 2 of his soldiers, before that scientist pins the Queen's assassination on Beth. And on the scientist's clothing, we can see that he has a Gromflomite-themed caduceus symbol on it, a famous symbol associated with the practice of medicine that features 2 twin snakes wrapped around a pole with 2 wings around that pole. The caduceus was used as the main symbol of the United States Army Medical Corps at the start of the 20th century, and that's pretty much when the caduceus symbol started being incorrectly used as a symbol for medicine, when the actual original symbol for medicine is the rod of Asclepius, a piece of iconic symbolism that has its roots in Greek mythology, namely the god of medicine and healing, Asclepius. And as Beth runs away, we can see that one of the windows on the ship has a B health rating on it, with that rating being due to a rat infestation on the ship that one of the soldiers talks about a little bit later. And in the style of Buzz Lightyear trying to communicate with Star Command, Beth uses an armed communicator to call the Defiance for a ride off of the enemy ship, due to her own spaceship having been blown up in front of her eyes, which is a bummer because I always liked Space Beth's spaceship, mostly because it seemed like a hilarious mashup between Rick's own space cruiser and an X-Wing from the original Star Wars trilogy, showing how Space Beth is growing to be both a copy of her own father as well as this whole Star Wars parody of a person. However, because this galactic resistance needs to have a vote on everything, Beth knew for damn sure that she was not going to get a getaway driver in 30 minutes or less, or even 30 days or less. So, out of options, Beth is forced to have to call her father Rick for help. But do you know who you can call for help with dressing better? The Heavy Spoilers merch store, fool! That was a rhetorical question. We've got the coolest shirts on there, man, inspired by both the latest Andor series on Disney+, as well as some fun designs for the upcoming Fantastic Four and Predator projects. So, if you want to get some nerdy new threads to throw over your head, check out the Heavy Spoilers merch store today. And before she actually makes this call, we can see a number of contacts on Beth's phone, including Beth number 2, the other Beth living on Earth that could or could not be a clone. Space Beth calling her Beth 2 implies that Space Beth firmly believes that she is the true, authentic Beth, which I kind of also believe too, because, I don't know, I feel like the Space Beth is a lot like Rick in a lot of ways, and I feel like that would be appropriate for the real Beth, but who knows? There's also listings for Casal, the robot Corsica who we saw earlier, her neighbor Doug Lug, and of course the Smith family therapist Dr. Wong, who has made repeated appearances in Rick and Morty. Then after the intro, we see Rick hanging out in a sushi restaurant in one of the many sub-levels that he has built underneath the Smith household. We first see this sushi restaurant located on level B15 about 2.5 minutes into the season 6 finale, just moments before Morty would learn that his grandpa was being extra nice to him because he was actually a robot Rick programmed to be a great grandpa to his family, while the real Rick plotted revenge against the evil Rick who killed his wife. Like, what is even the show? Like, that whole sentence just didn't make sense. What is that? This connection to that past episode might just be a hint towards Rick potentially using another Rick robot to help Space Beth throughout this entire episode. Because I don't know about you guys, but I kind of feel like Rick was acting really off and weird this entire episode, almost like he wasn't fully being his full grumpy self. And yes, I do know that Rick has been doing a lot of growing over the past couple of seasons and has been making more of an effort to be less of a toxic force in his family's life, but something about Rick this episode just seemed a little bit too nice. So I would not be surprised if this Rick was another robot Rick that the real Rick made to respond to Space Beth whenever she may need him. But that's just a theoretical hunch, really. Rick then appears in front of Beth and uses his quicksand and diarrhea guns to dispatch some Gromflomites for Beth before returning her to the Defiance headquarters. And as soon as Rick gets there, Rick is immediately smitten by one of the Defiance members named Bagan, who we saw for the first time during a flashback about 11 minutes into Season 7, Episode 6. And during this flashback, Bagan seems to have super red eyes, possibly implying that her ass was high as hell during that flashback meeting, which could end up explaining why Rick and Bagan have a bit of history together, as they both might have been smoking buddies with benefits way back in the day when they are both fighting the Alliance together. She very much feels like the Princess Leia figure of this team. And to prove to Beth that her assassination timing was awful, the Defiance then shows Rick and Beth news footage of the Gromflomite Queen's birthday on GNN, the Gromflomite parody of CNN. Rick then immediately goes off on the Defiance about their treatment of his daughter, with his passionate defense immediately getting Beth booted off of the Defiance team. To make it up to Beth, Rick leads her to the apartment of an insect supremacist arms dealer, who is hilariously watching two black humans make out with each other on TV when Rick busts in. A hilarious commentary on how a lot of publicly racist people are secretly sexually interested in a lot of the races that they claim to hate. And after interrogating this arms dealer by dangling and dropping him off of the top of his apartment building, like some sort of Batman Begins 2005, they learned that it was indeed Medical Officer Fantabulous that was responsible for the slaying of the Queen. This then leads the two to portaling directly to Medical Officer Fantabulous' base, and while holding the first soldier they see at gunpoint, Rick proposes that the two of them form an unlikely alliance in the vein of how the green fictional ghost Slimer from the Ghostbusters series ultimately befriended the Ghostbusters. However, when the soldier refuses, he whips out an inhaler filled with a red gas that instantaneously evolves him into a huge insect-like Hulk monster, with Rick referring to that gas as a Captain America-esque super soldier serum. Though if anything, this kind of works more like the cursed transformation that the Dark Elves used in Thor: The Dark World. After defeating a number of these mutated Gromflomites, Rick annoyingly asks if he and Beth are going to level up like video game characters for their efforts, but the two are then immediately greeted by Doctor Fantabulous himself, who tells them that he intends to release the gas on as many planets with advanced species as possible, starting with the Queen's Hive on his home planet of Gromflom 1. This entire alien species feels very inspired by the insect-like Geonosian race of aliens introduced in 2002's Attack of the Clones, especially with their hive-like structure. After trying to shoot the two out of the airlock but failing, Fantabulous then releases more of his mutated Gromflomite creatures that he calls his Ultraflomites, which sounds a bit like the DC Comics villain Ultra-Humanite, but he's just a crazy body-swapping mad scientist that served as Superman's first ever arch-nemesis, first introduces in the pages of June 1939's Action Comics number 13. Rick and Beth's battle with these creatures would then lead them to the Gromflomite break room, where a sign that says, "But first, coffee," can hilariously be seen in the background. And taking the fight up a notch, Beth whips out some energy blades from the back of her hands, extremely reminiscent of the psionic blades from the StarCraft series that were wielded by the Protoss race. Meanwhile, Rick uses a different tactic by pretending to be a Spanish matador to lead one of the mutated aliens into sticking his head into a trash chute before getting said head chopped off. After getting rid of all of these immediate threats, Rick then suggests that Beth call her old buddies at the Defiance to help her out, but she rejects this idea, saying that they'll just form a committee in order to come up with a plan to tackle this extremely time-sensitive matter. We can see that Beth clearly gets this aspect of her personality from her father, who would also immediately then ignore all of Beth's complaints about the plan that he comes up with, a plan that hinges on the cooperation of one of Rick's old Gromflomite contacts named Cisco. But we would of course learn in the post-credit scene of this episode that Cisco would accidentally oversleep due to a really bad drug habit that he picked up from his girlfriend. After Rick's plan inevitably falls apart due to Cisco's absence, he and Beth eventually crash land onto the path of the robotic Queen's motorcade during a giant parade in her honor. Rick then attacks the Queen's limo, causing the robotic Queen to be severely damaged while slumped over JFK style, as John F. Kennedy was also attacked during a big parade. However, the damaged Queen still manages to make it onto the stage intact enough to start releasing her mutating spores. But luckily, Rick and Beth manage to contain the threat before portaling the threat away, unfortunately leaving Beth infected due to an open wound that she sustained in the fight. With Beth now seriously ill and slowly mutating, Rick brings her to the military HQ of the Gromflomites. But instead of blasting everybody, they finally meet a Gromflomite that they can forge an alliance with Slimer style. I never want to use the term Slimer style again until I'm about to have sexy time with my wife. The physical appearance of this military leader and his soldiers kind of reminds me of the uniforms of the Imperium soldiers from Zack Snyder's Rebel Moon movies. Hopefully that's the right name of that faction, because I have not seen a single one of those awful movies. And I also see hints of the Street Fighter character M. Bison within this military general's design too. But yeah, after forging this alliance, Rick and the General work together tirelessly to come up with a cure for Doctor Fantabulous' disease, which Rick finally does after testing on countless Gromflomite soldiers. However, before giving this cure to his daughter, Rick would ultimately test this cure on himself first, briefly mutating into a giant Gromflomite before reverting back to his regular form. But due to the majority of the General's soldiers being used on those experiments, Rick is forced to call on his old Defiance war buddy Bird Person, as well as Bird Person's daughter, Bird Daughter, for some much needed backup. While Bird Daughter is being transported along with the rest of the team, she pretends to try to bite some of the Gromflomites facing her, causing them to react in fear, a reference to Bird Daughter's time in Galactic Federation prison for being the daughter of one of the Gromflomite's greatest enemies. which we saw during the post-credits scene of Season 5, Episode 8. It seems like the entire Gromflomite army is afraid of this little girl after hearing her prison stories. The infiltration group then enters one of the cave systems before shooting a flare into a tunnel, revealing a group of mutated Ultrofromites coming their way, in a moment that reminded me a lot of when Hawkeye would shoot that flare arrow in Endgame to see that pack of Outriders headed his way. They eventually fight their way to the Queen's underground hive, where they reunite with the mad Doctor Fantabulous and his biggest Ultraflomite creature yet, ordering the creature to smash his enemies like he was some sort of Incredible Hulk or something. Which is kind of hilarious considering that, like the Hulk in the MCU, this monster also has super soldier serum running through their veins. But eventually the team is able to detonate the payload, getting rid of Doctor Fantabulous and his weird biological weapon once and for all. And much like the end of Star Wars Episode 4 A New Hope, Space Beth and Rick are awarded medals for their service in ending the threat of a mad scientist, as well as the war in general. These endings are actually kind of a mashup between A New Hope and The Phantom Menace, as the ceremony also features a unification ceremony, just like the ending of The Phantom Menace did with the Naboo and Gungan races. But yeah, all in all, I thought that this was a fun and wholesome episode of Rick and Morty. Seeing Rick being so nervous about not messing up while helping his maybe daughter was kind of adorable and really shows that he's changed a lot over the course of the series. He seems to want to make up for the distant and rude parent that he's always been by making sure that his daughter got what she wanted at the end. And watching him lock in to try to find a cure for his daughter before testing the cure on himself to make sure that it actually worked shows a true parental side to Rick that we don't really see all that often. Like a lot of the time, Rick talks to Beth like a close adult friend rather than treating her like a daughter figure that he's protective over. So the times that we actually see Rick going full protective Papa Bear mode are particularly special, and I really enjoy that a lot. However, like I mentioned before, part of me doesn't know if this is actually Rick in this episode because Rick sounded super off here. Like, I don't know if this is just the Rick voice actor having an off day or something, but there's something really weird and stilted about his performance in this episode than in last week's. But I don't know if I'm just bugging. Let me know if any of you guys felt the same in the comment section down below. But anyways, thank you guys for watching this breakdown of episode 2 of season 8 of Rick and Morty. Like always, you can follow me at MasterTainment on Twitter, Blue Sky, Instagram, YouTube, wherever I am on the internet. But most importantly, follow Heavy Spoilers here on YouTube by hitting that subscribe button and maybe even hitting that like button if you guys enjoyed the video. And hey, maybe even stop by the Heavy Spoilers merch store to pick up some sweet merch for you or someone that you love today. But like always, I've been MT. You guys have been amazing. I'll catch you guys later. Bye.